And welcome back to the Nutrimedical Report for Thursday. It's the 17th and St. Patty's Day. It's really important to understand exactly what's happening in terms of wellness. In fact, I get the Anti-Aging Matters Journal. I get other newsletters from our academies of anti-aging medicine, environmental medicine, advancement medicine. And I want to go over some of the state of the art in terms of what the model of aging and disease is. And then we'll integrate it into our wellness protocols, which, by the way, are always updating. You'll see some that are 2 and 3 years old, which I'm doing major updates this year, end of 2015 actually. I put together the Dr. U book with the 1, 2, 3 protocols, which are the top starting nutraceuticals for particular conditions. And by the way, anyone can email me on on any question on health, and I'll provide you the starting protocols. So you don't have to be an elite customer. Elite customers do get phone calls back. That means your 6 orders in the last year. Doesn't matter what size they are in the last 12 months. Or you've placed a $1,000 order, accumulative. Now, the important thing is when we look at aging, I'm just reading through some reports from Dr. Walter Pierpoli and others on anti-aging. Dr. Cavinson, who belongs to our European division of anti-aging society. And these are a large number of doctors. For example, in A4M, American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine. And I'll be preparing a paper I'm going to present later in this year, probably at the Las Vegas conference. And what aging is it's a time clock. If you look at the Bible, it says that man's years are 70. But in fact, the potential lifespan for a human, and this is in the Bible as well, is 120 years. And you really don't see very many cases beyond that. There are some in the mountains of Georgia where they have some particular minerals that modulate the parts of the brain. Now, it turns out that your primary pacemaker for aging is the pineal gland that regulates the release of melatonin. It also, by the way, doesn't just release melatonin, but I have a theory, supported by pretty good evidence, that there are various nuclei in the base of the brain that are regulated by the pineal that actually send signals down, we call them morphogenic signals, down the nuclei of the brain through the central to the peripheral nervous system, and through collagen that actually regulate the epigenetics to turn on or off genes. In other words, aging is like a program, almost like a video. And when you get to a certain age, it counts down like a counter. So if you look at, for example, smaller mammals like mice that may only have a lifespan of 3 years, their counter is a lot shorter in terms of the number of counts of cycles of day-night light and release of melatonin. So it's important to understand that mineralization is very important. That's why we talk about Vitamin Mineral Max and Minerals Plus that are tracks amino acid chelate minerals. Some of the minerals that are particularly depleted as you get older are zinc, selenium, manganese. For example, to counteract depression, you need molybdenum, which is in our Minerals Plus. And if you want to optimize mineral concentrations for the chaperoning of minerals in, we have indium-ese. Indium is present in shilajit, which comes out of the Himalayan mountains, but it's much higher concentration, and it's usually best given alone, away from other minerals, 20 minutes away from breakfast or vitamins or bedtime. So indium-ese is a indium sulfate and helps to chaperone and bring other minerals into the cells and the nucleoplasm. I strongly recommend that people take, if they want to protect their eyes or they want to use anti-aging, they take our melatonin TR, because it appears that melatonin is the most protective against cancer. There are some cancer-inducing, if you want to call brain hormones, for example, prolactin is a cancer-inducing molecule. Prolactin, believe it or not. And it turns out that the anti-aging molecule is not only in the brain, but 99% of it is actually in the upper part of the jejunum, called the protirolin, or we call it TRH, because it helps to release thyroid-stimulating hormone. TSH is also a cancer-inducing molecule. TSH. And TSH is suppressed when you have adequate levels of TRH, which again the pineal gland regulates. So we have things that can stop that. Mitothyroid will help to normalize your thyroid gland, and you want to keep your TSH as low as possible, near zero. You want to have the optimum or high range level of free T4 and free T3. You want a very low level of reverse thyroid hormone. If RT3 is present, there's always a degree of insulin resistance, and we can actually measure that. So these are things that we call functional medicine, or quantifiable. When we look at different disorders, for example, is an example of this, aging of different tissues, oxidative stress, we now look at, say, autism. And here's a couple of different facts. So some people say we don't have the cause yet. Well, we're only inches away from an overall theory, but here's my current theory about autism. In autistic people, I consider, and this is my, if you want to call synonym for it, autism is a form of brain on fire. It's basically bowel-induced dopaminergic analogs. These are molecules in your lower bowel, because if you give a child very regular and continuous antibiotics before age 5, they have a 400 to 500% increased risk of autism. We've also seen these kiddies have certain SNPs or polymorphisms of certain DNA that protect the brain from oxidative stress, like glutathione-methyltransferase and other genes. We also see that they have organic acids. Dr. William Shaw has discovered that organic acids present from the bowel cross the blood-brain barrier and are dopamine agonists. So they act like they lock onto the dopamine receptor, which we also see in abnormalities in receptor number in schizophrenia. So the best way to think of autism is a form of bowel-induced dysbiotic schizophrenia. Kind of strange theory, but it makes sense. It also means that if there's a spread of a specific bacterium, it may be increasing in prevalence, not just from staph vaccines because there's increased oxidative stress, but the overuse of antibiotics, which causes dysbiosis, and the allowing these organisms to come and invade the gut. And we know that when we take anti-pathogenic treatments such as Allicin Med, Nutridyne, and Silver 100, and Nutridefense, berberstatin, we can actually see the decrease in these organic acids. We also notice that there's a decrease in what we call cholinergic pathways. My friend Jonathan has presented his work with the DANS Society over the last number of years, and has shown that if you increase cholinergic stimulation in the brain, you can actually counteract a lot of the symptoms. We also know mild hyperbaric oxygen. We have kiddies that after even a few weeks maybe started speaking in sentences and didn't basically were incoherent. Basically there was a wall, like in schizophrenia, and they were not able to communicate. Even if they were kind of centrally absorbing information, they weren't able to communicate. And after a few weeks of hyperbaric oxygen. So the cholinergic pathways are supported. These are acetylcholine, which is important for the learning centers of the brain, the hippocampus, the cingulate gyrus, ultrathiamine B1, uridine monophosphate, and cytidine or CDP choline. And those increase acetylcholine levels. We use those also in people that are developing early dementia. You can quantitatively measure the function of their brain. And again, this ties in with the idea that aging, most diseases in a sense, a form of accelerated aging of a specific tissue or organ. For example, you can measure a quantitative electroencephalogram, and the voltages across the cortex will show that their frontal lobes are not connected or showing this high voltage. You'll see a lack of coherence between different parts of the cortex. And usually these are administered by PhD psychologists that are involved with functional psychology. And there's a number of them certified across the country that are certified by Lexicor or a competitor company that can actually do what's called a multi-channel quantitative EEG. These are different than the EEGs that were done looking at seizure disorders by neurologists or pediatric neurologists. The problem is that in many of these children, they also may have seizure activity of non-motor nuclei in the base of the brain, which you can't see except if you do studies like a positron emission tomography scan, or you look at dysmyelination caused by oxidative stress with a special T1 weighted MRI scan. Now, people that are not MDs or have backgrounds in imaging or research, neuroscience imaging and research like I have, they won't understand these things and how they're all connected, but they are. You can actually do these studies and do a quick scan. You can do an organic acid test with Great Plains Laboratory with Dr. William Shaw, and you can see that children have autism. Well, the same with heart disease. We see increased levels of oxidized fatty acid and oxidized cholesterol. We even get antibodies against these. So when we talk about functional medicine and the aging process, aging is paced out by the brain. We can intervene there to slow the process or reverse it. Disease is actually caused by metabolic and genetic and epigenetic factors that we can modulate with our nutraceuticals, technologies like the micropulse across the brain, lumen photon, mild hyperbaric oxygen, the new technologies we're working on with microcurrent and specific. Welcome back to the Nutrimedical Report. So we're talking about the whole process of functional medicine, which is way more advanced than just herbology, naturopathic medicine, chiropractic, or conventional allopathic medicines, all inclusive, including surgery. I had a good example of a situation earlier this morning with a consult with a lady. She actually is an expat living in Central America. She mentioned that she has a dense cataract in her eyes. She has had some reversal using her protocol. I said to her, depending on how severe it is, if you've got most of your vision gone, the most important thing is you do a multifocal lens transplant, which can be put in there, which will help her vision immediately improve. You have to also reduce the inflammation in your eye, because the surgery will often increase the inflammation. So if you don't take things like CAN-C, cell detox, glutathione, Vision Max, Neurogen, etc., you're going to actually have an increase in inflammation and will start to get macular degeneration, optic neuropathy, or vascular problems in the back of your eye. So it gives an idea what the aging process is. The same way with arthritis. A lot of people will say, oh, if I can reduce my pain with a non-steroidal from my doctor, I can go back out playing golf. But the problem is they don't realize that their joints, it interferes with collagen synthesis, elastin, and hyaluronic acid polymer, so your joints actually go dry. Most of the drugs that you're given for heart disease, many of them actually will not fix the underlying heart disease problem. And the primary things in heart disease are two issues. Number one, the release of nitric oxide, which we can increase with Cardiovasc and Supernox. We can stop the free radicals with cell detox, glutathione, Regenerex, Nutritrala, and cell detox glutathione. And we can also protect the blood vessel wall with the ellagic acid, omega supreme krill, and vein away, diacemin. So, in other words, there are specific things we can do to reverse calcification, like full vitamin K2, minoquinone 7. We have many people, in fact, I just talked to a lady this morning also, that her husband is actually reversing his calcification of his arteries, which showed up on a high-speed CT scan by simply taking our protocol, including high-dose power C and full vitamin K2. And, of course, if they add the antioxidant protection of things like omega supreme krill, omega supreme, to lower cholesterol, abnormal cholesterol, omega cod liver liquid, and to stop elevations in triglyceride, you want to reduce insulin, leptin metabolic, diabetoline, biotin plus, and glycemics. And as you reduce the insulin, because the real key is many of the drugs used in treatment of diabetes actually raise insulin, and insulin is the culprit. If you're eating foods that stimulate elevated insulin, if you take drugs that push out insulin, and many of the diabetic drugs will push out insulin to bring the blood sugar down. By the way, blood sugar is not the devil. The problem is blood sugar is an extremely good patch to grab free singlet oxygen, and it creates a thing called singlet oxygen. It's oxidized, and it forms a thing called RAGE, or advanced glycosylation end products, because it cross-links proteins, changes their structure and function. So it makes them, if you want to call it, glycates them or attaches to them. Now, free radicals are much worse, but the real issue is singlet oxygen. So if you take things like our Nutritrala, carnosine, cell detox glutathione, Regenerex, and things like that are reducing the actual glycation, especially things like Nutritrala and carnosine, cell detox glutathione, what happens is the singlet oxygen is normalized. If you take our Nutri-Defense, which has SOD1, if you look at people that develop heart disease, they have a decrease in the isoenzymes that protect against singlet oxygen in their blood vessels. That's the culprit. The culprit is not sugar. Sugar is a bystander, and it causes damage, but it's not as near as damaging as the singlet oxygen. So the real issue isn't to lower your blood sugar, it's to lower the free radicals, because if we can lower your free radicals with things like Nutritrala and carnosine, even if your blood sugar hasn't budged, your actual hemoglobin A1C will drop because you're not having glycation. So the doctor's approach is not to lower, you shouldn't be chasing sugar as much as you're chasing insulin. In other words, you don't want to have insulin-stimulating foods with high glycemic index. You want to be on a ketogenic diet. If you take glycemics, even as snacks between meals, it'll lower your blood insulin because it smooths out your curve. It contains the component we had, carbo block, but now we've just included in the glycemics drink. So I tell people, have a snack at breakfast, a couple ounces, have another snack midday, between meals, and what will happen is your blood insulin will be lower. A way to measure that is to actually measure not only the hemoglobin A1C, but your blood insulin first thing in the morning. And if you're diabetic or pre-diabetic, they did some recent study published last week that 69% of males and females over 40 in California are pre-diabetic or diabetic by the current diabetic standards from the International Diabetic Associations. That's not good. It means, and we see the same thing going on in China and countries around the world. Diabetes, by the way, the primary cause of diabetes is a decrease in insulin sensitivity, a decrease in leptin sensitivity, which controls appetite, an increase in glucagon, where the liver is actually making sugar. So a lot of diabetics will actually have higher sugar in the morning, even though they haven't eaten anything, because their body's converting protein back into sugar. It's important to understand these things so that you won't take toxic drugs, whether it's heart drugs or diabetic drugs or insulin. Insulin's the devil. If you take insulin and it's not exactly what you need to bring your sugar, which is why they're trying to get more, we call tight adjustments of sugar rather than a big blomp, because large amounts of insulin pushes your body to make glucagon and cortisol, which counteracts insulin. And as your cortisol levels rise, you tend to make more adipocytes. You tend to get in more trouble. So a lot of the things that doctors do are wrong-headed. They actually will cause more trouble and they actually cause other problems. And so when someone says, well, your blood sugar is much better now, but your hemoglobin A1C hasn't dropped, it's because the free radical load's still high. So hemoglobin A1C, a better measure, also the more rapid measure, that'll react within 3 weeks, is fructosamine. If you ask your doctor to measure a blood fructosamine, it's fructose will change within 3 weeks rather than 6 months. So if your diet and so on is reducing oxidative stress, fructose, which is also oxidized very quickly in the presence of singlet oxygen, it'll respond much faster because it's not a glycosylated hemoglobin molecule, which lasts 6 months. The body clears the fructose pretty quickly. So within 3 weeks, it's gone. So that's why a lot of time when we're trying to teach people, this is science. It's not nonsense. It's not conjecture. This is well published. And one of the comments by Dr. Pierre Pauly in the latest journal I just read was, if you want to hide something from doctors, publish it, because they don't read. And it's unfortunate they don't. I mean, these are studies that prove that many of the things that are just in the cardiology and the diabetic and the other journals, they're published by their colleagues. They're working on PhDs or, pet projects they've been working on for decades. And a lot of this information is very well scientifically validated. So you need to understand that's what's going on. One of the things that we often see, for example, is the issue of fertility. Fertility is regulated again by the brain. If the brain doesn't release the proper hormones, the ovum cannot be expelled at the right time. If the uterine lining is not prepared to receive it, and there's not peristaltic movements of the fimbriae and welcome back. And your calls are welcome, by the way, not only on wellness topics, but in any geopolitical or other topic. We have some interesting things. I did talk to Chris Harris. He's been busy with a changed schedule, but he will be popping in for a few minutes. It's been, as of March 11th, the 5th anniversary of Fukushima Daiichi. I'm putting together an article which I'll have published and posted up here on the website, also on GCN Live, and it's important that people understand the principles behind it. And I saw Arnie Gunderson in the video the other day, and Arnie was talking about the fact that the population of just within 30 miles and so on of Fukushima Daiichi are being forced to go back to the areas of danger because there are stipends to actually allow them to live away from the high radiation zone. And we're seeing radiological dwarfism, we're seeing birth defects, we're seeing sterility, we're seeing early dementia, all kinds of nasty things happening. But also we're seeing equivalent to 400 tons of radioactive water being dumped every day into the Pacific Ocean from Fukushima. It's equivalent to thousands of times more radiation than Chernobyl or 3 Mile Island. And I'll talk about that specifically as well today. Basically, there's a couple of things that can be done to solve the problem. The first is we need to have a Kevlar spider silk tents over each of the reactor sites so they don't vent it into the troposphere. We need to be able to convert that airborne radioactive waste into solid waste and then remove it in proper containers in a double-hulled ship to go to a deep mine like a zinc mine somewhere. And we need to have depositories to bring all these radioactive waste from all of the fissionable type nuclear reactors. There's around 600 worldwide. Many of them are also near fault lines or in areas where there could be tsunami zones or they could be swamped with high water marks above their intake for the diesel engine backups to keep the reactor core from going critical. Second thing is we need to know where the corium is. And we can use muon detectors and ground-penetrating radar. The two enemies that we need to deal with are water and neutron flux. The water we can block not with an ice wall that these idiots tried to do, but a proper diversion project above it, probably a mile above or more, above the Fukushima Daiichi, because there's actually an aquifer that runs under the ground, carrying and diluting the radioactive waste from Fukushima Daiichi out into the ocean. They should also build a catchment basin just below it, so that if there is water that happens to manage to get through, or it's been already in the depository for years, 5 years plus now, that they can actually filter that water and turn it again solid radioactive waste, which we've had the technology for years. The other thing is neutron flux. If we put a hyperosmolar borinated water and then put what's called the crystallization frequency to speed up crystallization, we can create what's called a neutron flux inhibitor, because the corium is like a lava lamp. And if we do that, we can actually, knowing where the muon detectors are and where the ground penetrating radar, we can put pipes down to specifically put this hyperosmolar water and put their harmonic frequencies in terahertz waves to actually cause hypercrystallization and cause what's called neutron flux inhibition. It's because the neutron flux actually causes the speeding up of the fissionable reactions that release more isotopes, more tritium, etc. So there's some simple solutions. In terms of what's going on in the troposphere, we need to start looking at subatomic particle physics and how to be able to shatter nuclei, as Nikola Tesla said back in the 1920s when he wrote to Madame Curie, that we can use harmonic frequencies in subatomic particle physics to actually shatter nuclei in the environment, because now it's already out. There's the largest ocean on Earth is poisoned. We're seeing the death of the North Pacific. I call it radiological desertification. And in this article, you'll see I posted up a number of things to protect you from radiation. The first, of course, is Nutriodine to block radioiodine. The second is you need to resurrect your mitochondria. And we have things that will do that, like mitochondrial catalysts, uridine, CoQ10 ubiquinol, carnitine, etc. Things that stop free radicals, cell detox glutathione, Nutritrala, Regenerex, etc. And all of these will basically stop the free radical reactions that destroy DNA and proteins. So when you're looking at the whole realm of protection, what we're seeing is the radiological desertification. It damages mitochondria in the prokaryotic organisms, basically most of the fish, mammals, etc. It destroys many of the plants. It causes things like starfish to fall apart. What it's doing is it's bioaccumulating, and the longer-acting isotopes have a half-life where even if they stopped all the exposure, it would take 4 half-lives to drop it down to a level that would be reasonable. And that would mean it would roughly 200 years for if it stopped immediately. It's not going to stop unless they do these measures to actually prevent any further material getting into the area. This is not a site where they're just going to send a little robot in and try to find out what's going on. The corium is out of the building. It's down below underground. And if they used muon detectors and ground penetrating radar, they'd see exactly where it is and exactly where to stop the neutron flux and the critical reactions. So I propose these things, and I want to have people, if they have a scientific argument, not an ad hominem argument as to why this won't work. This is the process by which you actually contain reactors. And the problem is that you could even fly drones over the area to see if there's actually neutron flux at night. Some of the high-speed neutrons that are going actually oxidize the air and create what's called blue streaks, almost like a light show. And that's really bad. And of course, we have also what we call swarms or eddies of beta particles, which cause massive, almost like a dust devil of electromagnetic frequencies that are fluctuating around the site, which destroys the integrated circuits and robots, which is why you need cabled robots, or robots with what's called ferromagnetic chips that are EMP proof. And we have those ferromagnetic chips at Atmel Corporation in Colorado Springs, the only place that makes those on Earth. They probably don't want to bring out this technology, but the current approach that they're taking toward this is all pretty useless. And the problem is that the TEPCO company is just an umbrella company. All the service companies they contract with are all basically United States. In fact, it's the same companies that were involved with servicing the WIP reactor in New Mexico that caused these kitty litter storage containers to blow up and affect radiation release into the area where they're hydrofracking oil and gas in the immediate area. So this is really dangerous. It means your oil and gas are coming out radioactive because the WIP reactor storage site's actually blowing up. So You don't hear this in the regular news. You don't even hear it from the nuclear experts like Michio Kaku or even Arnie Gunderson to actually get into the specific details of not only how big the problem is. We got a caller. What's your name and what's your question? Yeah, Cecil, I got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
There's been talk lately about probiotics and other people putting out their own probiotics, and I just wonder, do you have any probiotics in the life support ageless or glycemics?
It's in the ageless, and you'll also see it in life support. We use the Roselle 6 strain as our base strain from Paris, which is a Pasteur Institute, the most powerful and well-researched strain on Earth. The most powerful strain in the entire planet is our How Are You strain. It's so powerful, if you take it even a month or two before you go to Haiti, you can't get and won't get either a viral or bacterial dysentery, such as, when you go to one of these places. So probiotics are important. I mentioned earlier that many of the illnesses that we have are actually due to organisms, whether we have the healthy ones in our gut or not. For example, we've now discovered there's a number of probiotic bacteria, like bifidobacteria, that are one of the most important reasons to protect against cancer. If you look at cultures around the Mediterranean, it's not just a Mediterranean diet, it's the cultured yogurt that they have and a particular bifidobacteria that are present. So the rates of cancer in people that are Lebanese, Greek, etc. around the Mediterranean, Croatian, is a quarter of the rate of the other populations in Europe, even though they're genetically similar. So probiotic bacteria create molecules that actually protect against DNA and cancer cell induction, inflammation and vascular illness, and then a lot of the life extension is actually due to probiotics. When you look at children with autism, it's my theory, and again there's a lot of evidence, that it is a dysbiotic form of schizophrenia, and Dr. William Shaw's research shows proof for this, that these chromogenic dopaminergic molecules actually cross the blood-brain barrier and form a dysbiotic schizophrenia as autism. Okay, in fact, I think you had a neighbor bring you to the emergency room. What do they do there for you?
Well, yeah, I always heal very fast. If I get a flu, it's like over in one day. This one, 3 weeks ago, just kept going for 11 hours straight. Never had anything like it. I was in pain. I had my neighbor drive me to the ER. Of course, they didn't give me any prices on how much this was all going to cost. Before,
right.
If they had given me prices, I would have walked out of there.
Right, because this is part of the reason why Donald Trump's 7-point plan, and by the way, I'm writing an article of using his 7-point plan as a starting point for a revolution and changing the healthcare system, but it'll take about 2 terms of President Trump in order to start fixing the healthcare system. Initially, we got a bit portability, competition, and bidding, etc., like he shows his plan. But you have to have you can't have prices all over the map, even in one town or city. It's ridiculous. It is unbelievable, and you can go to one hospital and you get double charged for.
It was quintuple charged. But anyway, so I would have walked out and taken my chances. But anyway, they did EKG, CAT scan, blood work, and it all came back. I was healthy as a racehorse, and the doctor just said, "You got a virus." And I went to my regular doctor, and he took did an X-ray of my lungs because the CAT scan didn't cover that. And he says, "You have no pneumonia, no. You got a big fat virus." Well,
but the virus is causing a viral pneumonitis, is the term. Now, what happens whenever you get enough obstruction, whether it's your respiratory bronchioles in your lungs, your eustachian tube, or your sinus cavities, you get infection behind the blockage. The problem is the doctors will tend to give antibiotics, and even oseltamivir, which is the antiviral flu medication, the studies have only showed it decreases the severity of the illness for 1 day. It doesn't rescue you if you're heading toward a full-fledged pneumonia. And a lot of time doctors will even use steroids and other things to try to stop the swelling so that the obstruction won't occur. The problem is that doesn't fix it. You have to actually have antipathogenics that will go through the biofilm, kill off the virus, and stop the inflammatory change. And that's where we get our Allicin Med, Nutriodine, and Silver 100. NutriDefense, which actually disrupts the viral capsid of all RNA and DNA viruses, stops the Fenton reaction, allows viruses to invade tissue planes, and stimulates the natural killer cell activity. So if you don't have something like this in your armamentarium, and as of last year, they published that in previous 2 years, there was a doubling of the number of serious pathogens affecting human populations and wild animal populations on the planet, and they're much more vicious. You see that with Zika, that's been around since 1947. Mm-hmm. And what's going on is that the environment is getting making people weaker, number one. And number two, when more pathogenic organisms emerge, they travel much easier with international flights and travel and the population. And they're also getting embedded, for example, when Zika virus gets embedded in the population, say, of mosquitoes in the Caribbean, or even up to, say, Manitoba, Canada, it's going to get into other mosquito populations. And what they've done is they've released what's called a gene plague. And again, this is just a theory, it's not proven yet, but when you see the emergence of Zika, it's because RNA viruses under oxidative stress will mutate 10,000 times faster than DNA viruses. And the OXY513A gene, actually, this jumping gene or riddle gene, actually increases oxidative stress when it gets embedded not only in animal populations, but spreads to other insects and hosts, like given monkeys or people, and it increases the rate of mutation of the virus, so you get more emergent deadly viruses. So right. So what it does is actually as a weaponizing platform to weaponize other organisms. So they shouldn't just test for Zika. They should test for Western Nile virus and other RNA viruses, maybe actually co-infecting the people that are getting illness. Now, they say 1 in 100 people that get Zika, their child, especially if they're in their first term, are going to get problems. But now they published in the New England Journal of Medicine just last week an 81-year-old adult male that ended up with Zika virus causing brain inflammation and having seizure disorders, and they isolated the Zika virus and proved even on their brain scans they were getting brain inflammation as an adult. So we're now seeing it's not just causing ascending Guillain-Barré paralysis, it may cause a meningoencephalitis, and God knows if it's a chronic infection, it may cause chronic neurological changes like Alzheimer's disease, a dysmyelinating disorder causing dementia. I mean, we don't know yet. What we have to do is we have to ask the right questions and start getting benchmarks to measure what's going on in the population. We know it's sexually transmitted. We just don't know how long it persists. We now know Ebola. We don't have any endpoint. And now, after more than a year, people that are infected have recovered. They continue to have sperm and their ejaculate that actually contains the Ebola. So the problem is, you see, the doctors are not very good scientists. I'm a scientist first and a doctor second. So I like to ask questions to say, what are we really doing? Like, for example, when you treat heart disease, what's the underlying cause? I'm going to have the technician on from Vendus, which is a company that contains the endothelics technology that measures blood flow after they compress your arm. There's two technologies, the endopat and endothelics. And we now know that open-angle-glaucoma, which is the biggest cause of blindness in the world, is actually caused by endothelial cell wall dysfunction. So if we reverse it with things like our Supernox and Cardiovasc and Gamma E+, and ellagic acid and Venaway, and we show that your endothelial cell wall function returns, it's much more important than just lowering intraocular pressures or zapping the edge of your iris to increase the outflow of fluid from the anterior chamber. It's the microcirculation stupid that's causing the loss of the neurons in the back of your eye or dysmyelination or blindness. And the problem is that doctors are very, very poor scientists, extremely poor logicians, and this is a big research company that came out of Israel that actually developed this technology. And what people need to start call a Technion Institute, and they're not afraid to research and go ahead and do things that will upset Big Pharma. Big Pharma is freaked out. They're freaked out by research by people like Dr. Pierre Pauly on proterolin or TRH. They're freaked out by work in the Anti-Aging Academy because, a lot of people don't realize if we conquer the underlying cause of diabetes and aging and so on, we'll start extending human lifespan, not just extending what I call the death span. In other words, you live a few years longer, but you're just still dying. We delay the chiseled number on your tombstone, but you're kind of just crawling along, going blind and getting demented.
After I talked with you, and you said basically quadruple. And I rarely get sick because I do like one a day of your Allison Med and 5 drops a day of your Nutrimedical and drink
right. Yeah, that's just a maintenance dosage.
Basically quadruple or more than that, and the next day of the Allison Med, Nutrimedical, and Power C Plus, and I was feeling better the next day.
Oh yeah, right away. Your oxidative stress is less, the virus is dead, you can't reinfect other tissues. When you don't have obstruction, the opportunistic bacteria can start infecting your middle ear, your bronchi, your respiratory bronchioles, or your basket cells. You can't get a dysbiosis in your gut that'll cause you to get diarrhea. And of course, the cytokines release also poisons your mitochondria, so you'll feel very fatigued and you're dragging your butt around trying to do things, and your brain isn't working properly because the cytokines cross the blood-brain barrier. People need to understand these organisms are getting more vicious, and the population's not prepared for it.
Well,
and unfortunately,
I kept going. I kept doing the quadruple thing or pentuple thing.
It worked, didn't it?
Yeah, I did it for about another 10 days to make sure I really knocked it
That's
out.
why I tell people on the Zika virus protocol, which I have for protection, if you're traveling to these countries, you better be taking it. And you have to also understand if your sex partner, if you're female, travels there, they can bring the virus back and infect you and your baby. And so they're recommending, condoms and so on. By the way, there was a children's hospital in Houston, and this is in the news from yesterday, that got sanctioned by the FDA, the fatal drugs allowed people, I call it, because they didn't want them to actually make a test to measure the RNA with a special laboratory procedure that was open. They're actually trying to block hospitals and labs and different universities from actually developing an open source test, because you want to measure the actual presence of the RNA, which is much more accurate measuring antibodies. You can do an RNA screen test in 10 to 15 minutes, and it tells you precisely if you have any virus in your system actively present. Not just antibodies, because you may not develop an antibody for some time or may not be adequate titer. And the FDA managed these maniacs, and of course the organization that protects laboratories is actually very angry with the FDA, trying to actually interfere with this hospital, the children's hospital in Houston, developing the test. There's also Canadian hospitals, like one I think up in Winnipeg, which is one of the international monitoring sites for viruses and bacteria and flu, is developing tests too, and in Canada, in the University Hospital in Edmonton. Because they're not under the same regulatory insanity as they do down here with the fatal drugs allowed people. But again, it's an example of the corruption in Washington, D.C. They protect Monsanto, or Mount Satan, I call it. They protect Big Pharma, and they want to block tests that will tell the public whether they actually are carrying a virus that could affect them or their own personal health. We don't know what it'll do. We don't know what chronic Zika virus infection will do. Maybe it'll give you something terrible, like cardiac induction problems, dementia, depression, schizophrenia. We don't know.
Okay, well, thanks, Doc. I appreciate it.
Yeah, in other words, ask better questions. We have protocols for almost any condition, whether it's autism or recovery from the flu or travel protection. As I say, you need to be a viral prepper, because the bugs are getting bigger, badder, and nastier and spreading faster than ever before. And the conventional treatment and even the alternative treatment by most people is pretty darn useless. Our things aren't useless. They're very powerful. We'll be back in a minute with hour number 2. Coming up hour 3, I did hear from Chris Harris. We're going to hear an update on Fukushima Daiichi.